Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a fish biologist and ichthyologist and also a PhD student. I specialise and study the evolution of Loricariids, catfishes, also known as plecos or whiptails or L numbers within the aquarium trade. So today I'm going to film a video on particularly fluval bug bites and discussing their nutrition, other aspects of feeding the fishes, mostly at what they're aimed at, but maybe other fishes as well. So fluval bug bites comes in a variety of different packaging and also in different models. So we've got here, these are the Pleco sticks that have been around, probably the longest of all the Pleco diets that I've seen. This is the more traditional ones that they came out with, so this is the bottom feeder. I'm not really going to discuss this one as much in the video. I'm going to focus on the Pleco ones because I think I can explore a little bit more without going into different groups of fishes as much, even though they're really diverse. So the main marketing is, so this is by Fluval. They do a lot of electronics, a lot of tanks. They're quite well known in the aquarium trade. They're owned mostly by a brand or company called Hagen. I believe they operate mostly out of the US. I don't know too much about the history of them, but the reason these were created is because Fluval did have fish foods before, and they were mostly, from my understanding or memory, because I never really bought them, was they were mostly fish based. So Bug Bites was brought out to contain an insect based protein source opposed to fish meal, and this is black fly soldier larvae. So it's quite an interesting ingredient actually to add, and they brought it out in a variety of diets, a diversity of different pellet sizes for different fishes. But obviously they had to bring out something for plecos, and this is what the most questionable aspect, because the majority of plecos are actually detritivores and algivores, which makes the actual use of an insect-based food a little bit like it all limits what it should be sold for. So obviously they could come in, so these ones are the ones I think were sold beforehand, so these are large. So when it comes to, it's really difficult to show, but when it comes to what these are marketed towards, they're not gape limited fishes. So plecos or even like hill stream loaches, stuff like that, they rasp on their food rather than having to swallow it whole. So it's not so much a worry that the food might be a bit too large for them to eat. Hence why you get wafers, which is their other ones. So some large greens coloured wafers. These are quite old because I don't actually use them, and I'll probably explain why. So yes, insect-based protein, and why insects over fish meal. So this isn't the first brand to do it. Other brands have done it before. The only one I know that was maybe one of the first is what's known as Fish Science, and they are now owned, I believe, by ALF, and you can get them probably in the US, but you can get them definitely in the UK and other countries like that, maybe even New Zealand. So these aren't the first to use insect-based protein, but the reason many people are moving away from fish meal is actually really environmentally destructive. It's kind of this non-discriminate way of fishing, removing just different fishes out of that marine ecosystem and smaller fishes that might be very important to the ecosystems in general. So moving away to a more sustainable source of particularly protein. So when looking at this, it's very much looking at that aquaculture side of feeding fishes and focusing on the fact that you need a protein source, but not really thinking too much about the protein source for the fishes, more about that sustainability aspect, because it's much more sustainable to feed black fly soldier larvae than it is fish meal. The other aspect is fish meal can be, I guess, a waste product as well, and many of them probably are waste products that you're seeing. Although the problem is if you look, when we look at the ingredients, you'll see it kind of defies the whole purpose of using insect protein. So they come in two different sizes, as I said, traditional wafer, traditional pellets. there's not much to that. So why don't I use them? Firstly, I do not find my fish actually, or any fish I've fed, so whether that be Loricariids or common pleco, hypostomus, or any loricariid, if I put this in, they don't go for it. They have no interest in it. And it might be that insect protein that they're not really, because yes, many of them probably do feed on some level of invertebrates. It doesn't mean that the invertebrates, these insect larvae, are even closely gonna stimulate them to feed. And if you smell it, it doesn't really have a smell that I would say is particularly strong or gonna get something to feed on. So I put it in and nothing eats it. So it kind of, like, you can have the most healthy diet and if fish don't feed on it, it's kind of a bit pointless. But also defies the object of using a diet that might bulk out a fish, or like one, say you're really tired, you just want to feed the fish or something, then feeding this instead, just like something quick, or even as a treat. There's no point feeding a treat if they don't touch it. So while I justified tetra particularly, this I justify even less because they just don't touch it. And it says fibre rich, yes, I guess, but we'll go into the packaging and ingredients later. But that's the main reason I kind of don't feed it, for any sort of reason. I mean, because there's plenty of things like Vitalis I sometimes have around and the ingredients are not great at all, but I just have it there. So none of these fish will touch it, these are just sitting there, and I don't think they're out of date, no. This has another year on it, this has another year and a few months on it, so they're not out of date, just nothing eats it. Anyway, so I'll get into the ingredients. So let's first look at this sort of general packaging. It's obviously very appealing to people in general. That's what packaging is meant to do. And remember, packaging is not cheap to make, and that is partially a little bit of a clue. But we have Loricariids here. This is Loricariids gibiceps, the gibiceps pleco, common pleco, one of their common plecos. And you can see it's saying fibre rich, I guess because of the chitin mostly. It's kind of inferring, I don't know, naturally palatable. And all of these claims somewhat have to be substantiated, I guess, somewhat legally. It might be very different with fishes as it is with dogs. So it says here clearly, okay, so the insects are raised on fruit and nutrition, fruit and vegetables, which all sort of food should be gut loaded. That's how you get nutrition, or you can cater nutrition to different organisms. The one interesting thing is invertebrates don't always contain high enough levels of, okay, that's rubbish, don't always contain suitable levels of B12. So obviously they've catered for that in other ways. Obviously we've got this sustainability. I don't think it's any agreement, so it's just there to say they think it's sustainable. And as you go down, a feed of unconsumed fruit and vegetables that would otherwise go to waste. Very vague. I'd like to know a bit more about this because it's quite an interesting concept, but also what kind of fruit and veg, are they actually eating it? How much is being removed waste? And then the larvae are dried. The other thing is high quality salmon. So you're using insects to avoid using fish meal, but you're using fish meal and you're using salmon, which is definitely not a waste product. So it's definitely, so the sustainability is like, oh, I don't know. It's, so that's quite a lot of salmon actually in that diet compared to, I guess, quite a few others aren't clear about how much they contain. But high quality salmon, it probably isn't the whole salmon and probably is more the waste shoots, I guess, of it. Otherwise they'd probably be charging a lot more. If you've seen salmon prices, fish is not cheap to buy. Maybe if you go for certain fishes in like the supermarket or fishmongers. Anyway, so let's look at this composition. So black fly soldier larvae, only 30%. So the problem is this is marketed at Loricariids. This is their pleco diet. Most plecos are algivores, and the tritivores mostly feeding on algae, bacteria, microorganisms, things like that. So why is there such a high volume of the first ingredient being soldier fly larvae? And they could say, oh, it's for the carnivores. There's not actually that many carnivores. And then you could say, oh, but I use it to bulk out and improve on another diet. Then it's not a complete diet, even though it does say complete. Therefore, you shouldn't need to add anything else. And bottom feeders and catfish. Bottom feeders, that can mean anything. Catfish, I think there's like 3,000, 4,000 species of catfish. So it's like saying, you go into Petsmart, I want some rodent food, and you just pick up any sort of rodent food. It'll work because they're all rodents. It's so annoying. So pleco foods, ideally, I would rather them be more algivorous, and then there'd be carnivorous foods that you could feed your carnivorous species instead, rather than have a whole diet that this is just. So black fly, soldier larvae and salmon. So that makes 52% of it is carnivorous. So this is not a traditional loricariid food. It's more of a carnivorous food, but then you get a little bit further on. So wheat. So first I should say, if you're feeding insectivore, and some loricariids are insectivores, some feed on a little bit more than others, and some are maybe what you could say somewhat omnivorous. That's great. Invertebrates, they're going to be able to extract the right amount of nutrition, most likely. Salmon is not. If they are not a piscivore, they are not going to be able to extract as much nutrition from that. I think there's a little bit more behind some of these ingredients that you see, or the choice of ingredients, because a lot of people will sort of not even look at this. So salmon, 22%. So why? They don't even say actually where the salmon's from. How do we know this is sustainably fished salmon? How do we know they might be from sustainable aquaculture? Where are these salmon from? So wheat I actually doubt. So this ingredient list, let's just kind of look at it as it is. This is based on feeding carp, feeding tilapia, feeding fish like that you're then going to eat. This is not based on the science for long-term fish care, and because those fish, you don't need to care about how long they're going to eat. How long they're going to live. You just need to get them to grow as quick as possible on the cheapest diet. And as we know, these two vegetables are extremely cheap. Wheat as well. The purpose of it? Yes, there is nutritional purpose, but could there be better ingredients? Would it affect the price? It depends. But wheat, I don't even think, these fish do not eat plants. Some of them do eat plants in the wild. The most common plant you'll see is like brophytes, which is mosses, very simple plants, very easy to break down, very easy to digest. They're not going to be feeding on wheat. Is extremely going to be difficult to digest, even like people. And then many will say, "Oh, but it helped them pass their waste." To be honest, a lot of this might be a little bit more. It's not close to their natural diet, and probably, yes, they might be in captivity a while, but they're not going to have involved entirely different digestive systems in that time, particularly bacteria. This might even harbour maybe not even the most ideal bacteria or archaea or similar in their gut. So we've got wheat, peas, potato, just so you can say it's got vegetables in, it's complete. But fishes aren't humans. They don't need, each species has a different diet, and it doesn't mean they need, you have one slab of meat, one slab of vegetables, and peas are. So peas are quite I don't hate the addition of peas, but I think it's to boost protein most likely. Potatoes likely to bulk out. These two are probably not being digested easily. This is a diet that I'd say would cause very high waste in algivores, because that's not being processed. These likely aren't being processed. But then in carnivores, that's got much more limited digestion for carnivorous loricariids, because they are invertebrates feeding on insects, mollusks, things like that. And then, so we've got dicalcium phosphate. I assume that is more for nutrition. Alfalfa. Oh, why does everyone add alfalfa? Yeah, so these are mostly additives, just to bulk it out really and fulfill where their nutrition might not be traditionally complete. But this traditional idea of completeness is based on carp and fishes like that, which means that it's like the whole idea of mammalian diets, for example, being based entirely on the diets of, say, cattle, and then assuming that your cat needs a similar diet to a cow, because all the science is on cows, or most of it. And we do have papers on loricariids where even just one algae can replace an entire diet with this sort of similar ingredient list. So we've got protein. I always say it depends on the source of protein, not the actual protein itself. Oh, why is it not focusing? Anyway, I'll zoom in on that a little bit. There. So protein depends on the source of protein. Just because it's high protein doesn't mean that's going to be accessed. Fat's fine. It's kind of useful for particularly breeding fish to have higher than normal levels of fat. This protein, so the ash, I think Fluval's probably very well aware that people confuse ash with being actual ash rather than being the mineral content of the diet. So that's why it's actually quite low. Just comparing, most of them are about 11 or 12, I think. And just comparing the actual normal diet, if I can open it, because they haven't made it the easiest to view. But I would say that ash is very low, and ash is actually the mineral content. So there might be a little bit more to it. I can't even open that one. I hate it when they like peel so you can see, but I can't peel it. Oh, and this one's even worse. This one's only 5%. I'll go for the normal wafers because they are actually slightly different. Then we've got all the different nutritional additives. So it's actually quite a short ingredient list, but as I've said in previous videos, just because the ingredient list might be short, it doesn't make it better than one that's long, and vice versa. There can be a lot of that sort of thing with it. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go over the smaller one, the wafers. So this is the wafer version, so the slightly larger version, and the same sort of similar applies. And it says it's an algae crisp, which you'd assume, and many people say, oh, but this must contain loads of algae, so it's great for algivores. And this easy digestible is probably not based on loricariids. It's probably not based on science for loricariids. So here, where they've hidden it, is the actual ingredients and aspects like this. So still, first ingredient, so you don't want to see my alpha nails, insect meal. Great. And it's now mostly mealworms. That's got a lot. I find mealworms really high in chitin. I don't think that's going to be easy digestible by a loricariid, who might, if they're carnivores, maybe, but it's much higher. And then only 10% of the black fly soldier larvae. And then this is where we get into the problem with algivore diets, which quite commonly do this. So that's what, 25% carnivore, like a carnivore sort of base behind it. Then we get wheat. Why? I guess this is one thing that I would say possibly does bulk it out, and more wheat. And then if you look at the percentages, they're not actually including the percentages for all of these ingredients, and that's because it's going to be somewhere between that 10 and 5%. So I guess you could somewhat calculate, but so we've got wheat gluten, wheat germ, alfalfa, so more cereals. So basically 4 of these ingredients are basically cereals. These fishes don't eat those sorts of plants in the wild. It's going to be very difficult to digest. This is probably going to be a very high waster. And that's where we get to the algae, spirulina. So that is only, what, somewhere between 10 and 5%, I guess, of the actual whole diet. So is this an algae wafer? And you'll find this so often. It's got some algae. Obviously, there's some... kelp, only 5% also included, but that doesn't, if you think it's an algae, like an algae wafer, actually makes an algae based diet, I'm not sure what to say. Like, this is not ideal. And then we've got shrimp protein, spinach is an interesting one because it is very high in calcium, but there isn't actually another source that would be high in calcium. And what I mentioned earlier applies for insect larvae, is that it might not actually have as much certain nutrition that you might find ideal. Obviously these fish though aren't adapted for feeding on fishes, so they probably don't need it, and they probably get a lot more from the algae, but that's a very minimal ingredient. And activated charcoal is a really weird one. Protein 43.5%. How is that higher? I actually think it's higher probably because of maybe the spirulina, and then okay, there's fish protein in there, and I think I saw somewhere else okay, no, so the fish protein might be boosting it. The spirulina probably is, as is the kelp. Shrimp protein, yeah, so it's higher, but it doesn't make it ideal. And that mineral content is only 5%. And then nutritional additives, quite a few more. I just don't, like, if they did feed on it, it's like one of those things that you could have just in case. But just having it to say it adds diversity, it does in the way that it contains more insect-based ingredients compared to other brands, but it doesn't mean that it's adding anything. There's nothing here that adds anything really on to any other brand. There's not enough algae to say it boosts it for algivores. For carnivores, there's all these cereal ingredients. So these cereal crops, wheat and in the other one peas and potatoes. This one's got so much cereals in it. I just wouldn't look at it for loricariids at all. Like Pterioplectes, they're so generalist, and some hypostomus, some Winemiller probably. They're so generalist, but it's going to be producing so much waste that they're probably not digesting at all. And it just, what I know, they wanted a bug-based diet, but either make it for carnivorous loricariids and remove many of those cereals and look more for something a little bit more natural for them, and then don't market towards algivores at all. Or instead just don't or just add an algivore diet. Add more algae, minimal insects, just similar to a pasture where they've got very few, a little bits of that black soldier fly larvae and fish meal. But just don't, you can't force these animals to apply to your rules almost. These are not insect feeders, many of them, some of them do. It's a very hard group to generalise. But this is the diet I'm probably most critical on because it is very popular. And a lot of people see these terms, algae wafers, algae crisps, pleco, and assume it works for all plecos. Or they buy it and say they've got diversity in their diet, and they've got... the only diversity is whether 2 brands that, or 5 brands or 10 brands they've got have fish meal versus insect meal. That's not diversity. And there's so much of an argument, 2 or 4. Anyway, I'm going to end this video here. And I'm going to do a more positive one maybe this week or so. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you like my videos, please comment, like and subscribe, and goodbye.